Thermopylae, The Few Against the Many by Henry Chan and Jacob Charlton. At the Battle of Thermopylae in 480 BC, a united Greek military force, led by the Spartan king Leonidas, took a stand against the invading Persian army because they had a responsibility to uphold the rights of their citizens to prosper on Greek soil without the fear of foreign dominion. This heroic final stand would prove to be the single most important event of the Second Persian invasion of Greece. But this was not the first Persian invasion of Greece, as the current Persian king's father, Darius, had launched an invasion about 11 years prior. Darius saw the invasion as a chance to expand his empire into Greece. In 491 BC, Darius sent emissaries to all the Greek states asking for submission. Most of the Greek states submitted to Darius, but in Sparta and Athens, the Greek ambassadors were put on trial and executed because their city-states had encouraged the unsuccessful Ionian revolts, which Darius was forced to put down. Eventually, the invasion culminated at the Battle of Marathon, where the Athenians seized victory and forced the Persians to withdraw into Asia. A couple of years later, Xerxes, the new Persian king and Darius' son, began preparing to invade Greece again. However, the Greeks had also been preparing for another Greco-Persian war. In 482 BC, the Athenian politician Themistocles convinced the Athenian council to build a massive fleet of ships to combat the Persians. The Athenians also had the incredible foresight to see a united Greece would be necessary for a second victory against Persia, and so they sent out emissaries to the other Greek states requesting a temporary alliance. During the first invasion of Greece, the Spartans were unable to help in the decisive Battle of Marathon due to Spartan law which forbade military activity during the festival of Carnea that was currently in place. The Persian military likely chose to invade at this time because they knew of the Spartan law which forbade them to fight. However, Leonidas was able to convince the Spartan council that the Persian threat was dire enough to justify violating Spartan law and send soldiers to combat the Persians. Even so, the council was only willing to send a small force of Spartans. Leonidas took a combined Greek military force to the Thermopylae Pass with the hope that they could stop the Persians from entering Greece. The Thermopylae Pass was the only way to reach the heart of Greek civilization safely, as the other routes meant certain death. The battle took place approximately around August or September in 480 BC. The battle was running concurrently with the naval battle of Artemisium. Leonidas led the Greek army that consisted of 7,000 soldiers from the Greek states Thebes, Thespia, and Sparta. On the first day, around 5,000 Persian archers fired barrages of arrows at the Greeks, but these proved ineffective against the Greeks' well-crafted shields and helmets. Afterwards, the Greeks put themselves in front of the Phocian Wall, the narrowest part of the Thermopylae Pass, and repelled the Persian frontal assault that consisted of 10,000 Medes. The Persians then launched a second assault with 10,000 immortals, Xerxes' personal bodyguards, and the most elite of the Persian army. But they were still slaughtered because of the Greeks' significantly longer spears. On the second day, the Persian infantry continued to be massacred by the Greeks until Xerxes at last called them off. Later that day, Xerxes was informed of a secret mountain path that led around Thermopylae by the Greek trader Ephialtes, who was seeking reward. Xerxes then sent the Persian commander Hydarnes and his 20,000 men to encircle the Greeks by taking the secret mountain pass around Thermopylae. On the third day, Leonidas learned from a runner that the Greek soldiers guarding the secret mountain pass had been slaughtered. Leonidas then sent over 3,000 soldiers to retreat and kept around 1,500 soldiers to form a rearguard to cover their escape. The Greek army that made the final stand consisted of about 400 Thebans, 300 Spartans, and 700 Thespians. The Thebans who stayed likely did so of their own volition because they objected to Persian rule and saw they would not be able to return to Thebes if the Persians conquered Boeotia. The Thespians most likely stayed as a simple act of self-sacrifice, as they had done so before and would do so again. Xerxes gave his men at the secret mountain pass sufficient time to descend and then began his assault. 10,000 Persians then charged the Greeks from the front. The Greeks then charged forth from the Phocian wall in an attempt to kill as many Persians as possible. The Greeks fought with their spears until all of them were broken. Then the Greeks switched to their short swords. Xerxes' 2 brothers were killed in the Greek assault. Leonidas was eventually killed by Persian arrows. The Greeks and Persians then fought over his body. The Greeks finally obtained his body and retreated behind the Phocian wall, and then made their last stand upon a hill. The Thebans surrendered, but several were slain before their surrender was accepted. The Persians surrounded the hill and killed the rest of the Greeks with arrows. Xerxes had Leonidas's body crucified and his head severed. Since the Persians were free to move past Thermopylae, the Greek fleet at Artemisium retreated to the Saronic Gulf. The defeat at Thermopylae convinced the Spartan council to mobilize the entirety of the Spartan army, but this happened too late to prevent the Persians from conquering the Boeotian cities. Soon after, the Persians marched upon Athens, but the Greeks had already been evacuated. The Athenian fleet at the Saronic Gulf, under the charge of Themistocles, lured the Persians into the Straits of Salamis and decimated them in what would become known as the Battle of Salamis. Xerxes then retreated into Asia out of a fear that the Greeks might trap his army in Greece. Xerxes left his general Mardonius in charge of the invasion. However, due to his lack of knowledge pertaining to the Greek terrain, Mardonius lost at the decisive Battle of Plataea. The rest of the Persian fleet was mostly destroyed at the Battle of Mycule.
Once the Persian invasion was over, the Greeks erected a monument of Leonidas at the battle site in his honor. 40 years later, Leonidas's bones were returned to Sparta, and funeral games were held every year in his honor. More recently, there was also another monument of him erected. Thermopylae became one of the most famous battles of all time, and also set an example of how good training, equipment, and the tactical use of terrain all provide outstanding advantages. Above all else, Thermopylae set a precedent for how being a citizen of a country means more than just living there. It means answering the call to arms when needed, or otherwise acting with integrity and honor like the Greeks did so many years ago. And though the Greek army that made that courageous final stand may be gone, the ideals and principles behind their heroic sacrifice are just as relevant as they were 1,500 years ago.